Hi, Kirsten. How are you?
Hi, Annie. Good to see you.
I have a lot of questions for you this week. I have questions for my clients, and it has to do with communication. Communication mistakes occur regularly, we know.
Mhm,
But how about eye contact? Have
mhm.
you thought about eye contact as a skill? Where does your eye contact go so the rest of the persons in the group won't feel left out?
Um, First of all, there is a tendency to give good eye contact when we're one-on-one, but we really often overlook the importance of eye contact and subtle body positioning when we're in a group context. This is really important for leaders to be aware of because they are standing in a position of empowerment within the group dynamic. So it's extra important that they, or even in a social environment, if you're the one that tends to have a little bit more pull or more presence in the group, to be aware of eye contact, rotating it to the different members in the group.
Mhm.
So one of them is to develop an awareness of the general flow of the
Mhm.
conversation. Notice if there's more of an intense exchange between two or three participants and the other two or three are being marginalized or just not taken into account. We know how uncomfortable it can be on the
Mhm.
receiving end of that,
Mhm.
right?
And not
So,
not only marginalized, but it's like you get the shoulder. It's
mhm,
a very subtle, it's a body movement. I mean,
yes.
you don't have to give them their back, but you
Mhm,
get the shoulder, and suddenly you had the eye contact and it moved completely for 70% to the other person. And another thing that's happening is you're talking one to one. What
mhm.
about that person is looking everywhere else instead of you? He's more focused on who's coming in.
Yes.
Or I don't know, it could be the iPhone, I don't know, but it's very important. It's something really subtle. If we have empathy or we're using our emotional intelligence, we want to integrate everybody in the group when
Mhm.
we're talking, but we want everybody to listen. How many seconds with each person one should take time? Or if you're talking only to one person, Kirsten, I'm talking to you, and we have a third person, and I have more in common things to talk with you than the third party.
Mhm.
How many seconds I'm gonna check him out
Mhm.
or have my eye
So
contact in order to make that person feel part of the group? That's very, very important.
yes, and I think that that is a part of a sensitivity to
Mhm.
the other person that is standing there. There are moments when we feel just naturally more inclined towards certain people. But in order to have emotional intelligence, we do have to acknowledge the presence of others in the group. And what we want to make sure to do it though is to try to access from within ourselves an authentic
Mhm.
plug in with the other person and not just a token. Okay, I checked off, I gave eye contact for 2.2 seconds
Yeah.
and now I'm done.
Mhm.
So there has to be an authentic engagement and to really try to extend yourself in that direction.
Mhm.
That is a big sign of a good sign of a healthy leader.
Mhm. Yep, yep. Mhm. Consider for a moment just using eye contact to show empathy.
Mhm.
You know that with the eyes, we can tell a lot of things, and you're talking to someone, something really important. Another person shows up, and suddenly that person changes. It's changing the eye contact immediately to the other person, not to you.
Mhm.
How do you start to feel? How
Yeah.
that person is feeling, and they're calling me and they're saying, Annie, I don't know what's going on.
Mhm.
uh, I don't know if that I don't like that person. I start to feel left out, and it's something that it has come up, but the person that's feeling doesn't know exactly what's going on. And I don't know if that has to do with the awareness of the person has to know what's going on, or the awareness of the person that's talking. Explain us a little bit what might be going on.
So first of all, I think it's very important to highlight that we are wired differently. We're born with different temperaments. Some people are more interpersonally attuned to nonverbal cues. Others are less so. So what can happen for people who are very interpersonally attuned, they can have a very strong response when the group is not integrating them with a visual or with a gestural response. So some people will say, why do I care so much that I don't fit in? It's actually partially how you're wired, right? You're oriented towards that, but also it has to do with belief systems that get set up where we begin to assume our value is less if we are not being visually engaged as well as verbally engaged. Right? So it's a combination of both.
Yeah.
Also, when we're communicators, often when we're the ones communicating in a group dynamic, we may be less aware of how we are interacting because we're so focused on our content that we're less aware of how our communication is impacting the group. And so here again, self-awareness is really important. So when you're in a group, you want to begin to make sure that the eye contact is flowing to all the members in the group. Also be aware of the positioning of your body. You might be slightly skewed away from someone, and this will impact their sense of connection with the group. It requires a certain amount of intention and awareness when we're in a group to decide that I am going to learn to be more aware of how the group dynamic is flowing. This is very important for leaders in a staff meeting, you know, to really see it's about inclusivity, right? But it's also about really understanding neurodiversity, how our brains are wired. Some people are going to respond differently. So from what is our habitual style. So it's very helpful to begin to understand, and this is where the Birkman can be also very helpful in understanding different styles that have different needs. And let me give you an example. There might be a group that is primarily wired more towards factual information and a more upfront, very direct communication. If you have someone who has the skill of interpersonal subtle attunement, but is not as forceful in their communication, or might have the information is not so factually oriented and is more oriented towards how interpersonal dynamics can help solve a problem with a company's problem, let's say. If that person is in an environment where there are people that are in general different from their style, they might begin to isolate. The same might happen on the opposite end. An environment that is highly interpersonally attuned, let's say usually school environments, an elementary school environment, you'll have highly interpersonally attuned people, and you might have some people that are more linked towards, I want to talk about facts and procedures. These people might find themselves retreating because they can't find the way to access the group code, what's in the flow.
We've had this since we were teenagers, and it's coming up again, and we think we are 50 something, we are more mature, we're not going to feel the same way as we did when we were 14, 13, and it happens all over again. But when you're talking, we forget to see, we forget to check the faces, check your body language, check the person that's listening. If he's not in a good position, maybe he's uncomfortable. And if you feel that the other person is uncomfortable, I think we have to stop a little bit, maybe ask him a powerful question. What do you think about that?
Absolutely. I think that, so what happens in group dynamics, we really need to increase our awareness. That's a fundamental skill that we tend to overlook. And the awareness is not only, am I sharing my attention in a
Mhm.
more broad way, but
Mhm.
also what is the delivery or the impact of my message having on others?
Mhm. Mhm.
To begin to tune into, is there someone who's checking out? Is there someone who's withdrawing? Is there someone who seems very eager to participate but is not able to enter into the conversation?
Yep. Yep.
So we need to develop attunement to that, particularly when we're in a leadership position.
Yep.
The other aspect that we need to attend to is when we're on the receiving end, when we're feeling excluded, when we are feeling disempowered within a group dynamic. There can be several things that can be happening. One is we don't want to dismiss the fact that there are sometimes more dysfunctional group dynamics where there's an establishment of a hierarchy of power, where certain people can't access that power. It can be due to prejudice or race or just hierarchy within the power of the organization. And that would be very important for you not to judge yourself, but to begin to question where the problem is in a broader sense.
Mhm.
And the other thing that is important, if you're on the receiving end of feeling left out, is to find someone in the group that you feel comfortable with and say, I notice I'm having difficulty connecting, and have a check to make sure what your perception is, get a reality check, but also understand that it might be a stylistic difference.
Sometimes there are certain people that talk 70% of the time only to one person.
Mhm.
Just think how the rest of the persons inside the group are feeling.
Yeah.
And we're not aware of that. So I think this is very important to leaders.
Yeah, I definitely think that we need to cultivate. Often we might have the best intention, but we are not aware. So
Mhm.
part of it is awareness training.
Mhm.
When you're in a group dynamic, notice how the dynamic is flowing. Notice who are being highlighted, and perhaps ask strategic questions to people who you seem to be engaged but are somehow not being able to access the group,
Mhm.
or take hold of the arena. So I think that we can subdivide it in two ways. One is the receiving end, when we are feeling left out, and the other is when we're in a leadership position and speaking up in a group. So let's start with a leadership position. Remember to be aware of the flow of the conversation. This is very important. Be sure to engage not only with your eyes, but also your body movement, and to ask questions which can prompt people who are withdrawing for whatever reason. So that would be the first thing.
Mhm.
The second thing, the second aspect is the receiving end. When you are feeling disempowered, uncomfortable, you can, first of all, begin to question which aspects of this dynamic are systemic problems, where we see a pattern, and become aware, wow, the system runs in this way. Just having an awareness of that can be helpful. And then have an awareness of what are my thoughts that are coming up in relationship to it,
Mhm.
especially in terms of my perception of my sense of value.
Yep.
Because sometimes we really have to question those thoughts that come up because we're under stress. And the third thing is to understand neurodiversity. There's a different way of addressing people
Brain
in a
wiring.
group,
Yeah.
and there's different ways we are oriented towards being interested in communicating, our communication style and the content and